As a content warning, this episode contains talk of suicide and the destruction of the human race. Use your best judgment as to whether you should listen to this episode or not. Thank you. All right, Steve, bring us in.
Hi, and welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I am Steven Zuber.
I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
And I'm Jason Herrider.
And Jason is sitting in for Katrina today because Katrina is out on vacation.
Traveling abroad.
In Australia, no less. As far from us as she could possibly get.
While still on Earth.
Right.
It's like 36 hours away by plane.
Damn.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So we have Jason on today to talk about voluntary human extinction, or not necessarily voluntary human extinction, but just whether humans should be around in general. Are humans the worst thing ever, or just almost the worst thing ever, I guess, would be the question we have to pose to Jason.
The first time we met Jason, he mentioned a thought experiment that I thought couldn't go undiscussed, so it's been a long time coming, but I wanted to have it on the show. Actually, I'll let you go ahead and take it from here.
I don't remember what thought experiment you were talking about.
Killing everybody?
So, there's a lot of ways that you can get to killing everybody. What?
Pressing a button to end all human life?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. So the
Are there other ones that you could get behind, or?
I mean, I don't know that I could necessarily get behind. You have like a lot of utilitarian arguments can end in either something awful like a utility monster, or killing everybody, right? Or as I prefer, I think my ultimate goal would be Brave New World.
Which, when I read Brave New World, I didn't get all the way to the end because I just kind of got disgusted with it. I was like, how is this not a wonderful, ideal society?
Everybody's happy. There's drugs. There's free drugs for everybody.
Everyone is born knowing what their purpose in life is and that they are the best person to do this thing. There's no, stumbling around trying to figure out what you're supposed to do or how you can contribute to society. It's just all there laid out for you.
Except
the one guy. Yeah, there was an accident when he was born. And
there was one liberal arts major who who decided that the world was not as good as it could have been.
Right.
Well, it needed more pain and suffering.
It's obviously shitty for him because, you're optimized for one specific role and then you're the rust in something else. No, but it would be like if the David Bowie person got stuck in a job for engineer types, accounting or programming or something. Mm-hmm. And that was what he was forced to do for his whole life. Yeah, he'd be miserable. And it really sucks for him, but I didn't see how this book was supposed to be an argument for this society is shitty. One guy got fucked due to a genetic accident. Society itself is still pretty good.
Everybody was happy. Everybody happy. And I think that's where a lot of these arguments end up with, right? You have most utilitarian arguments kind of take a summation, right? And obviously we're generalizing. Most utilitarian arguments take a summation of total happiness and well-being of humanity, and then they want to overall increase that that total sum. My take on it is a little bit different. First off, I include animals.
A lot of utilitarians include animals too.
Yep.
And because we're trying to do a lot of explain like I'm five, I think we've covered exactly what utilitarianism is. It's an ethical system that says the right thing to do is that which increases the happiness for the greatest number of possible participants, depending on what kind of utilitarian you are. I think going all the way back basically included animals.
I don't know if it did.
Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism?
I don't know.
I know at least it's in John Stuart Mill.
I guess that would be all the way back, yeah.
So the idea is that, okay, well, should I donate to this charity or this charity, or should it could be even more broad than that, right? Do I stay at home all day and watch TV, or do I go to work so I can pay bills and give some to charity or something?
I think at its most basic, it boils down to, a way you could put it is it better to give one person $5 or to give 10 people 75 cents? And, you add up 10 people times 75 cents is more than $5. So even though they are not going to be as happy as the one guy who got $5, total happiness is increased more if you go with the 75 cent round. And that's basically what utilitarianism is. It's, it deals in terms of utils, which are these imaginary measurement units for measuring how happy someone is.
Points, yeah.
Yeah, points, basically. And there's no way to actually measure them. But in theory, it's, if something would make one person unhappy, but the other, and someone else more happy than that unhappiness, then the net utility is positive.
And it takes basic axioms that most people agree with, like happiness is good, unhappiness is bad, people want to be happy, they don't want to be sad.
Yeah.
And the soundbite from Jeremy Bentham is the greatest happiness or the greatest number. And then he described the difference between total aggregate and average. So that, I think, was in the last century where people broke down, do you take the total number of utils or happiness of everybody on Earth and add them together and say, okay, cool, it's at 7 billion, or I guess that assumes everyone had one. So whatever, it's at 7 trillion. The higher the better. Or the average utils are at like 3 billion. So depending on how you approach it depends on how you might answer some various questions on what you should do.
All right, we should actually cover that as the abhorrent conclusion problem. But before we get to there, I did want to point out that conversely, it makes perfect sense when I put it in terms of cents and dollars per person. But conversely, there's the now famous pushing a fat man in front of a trolley problem, where a trolley is on a track to hit 5 people, and do you push a fat man in front of the trolley, which would kill him, but would stop the trolley before it hits the 5 people? And generally the utilitarian answer, at least the classical original utilitarian answer, was yes, because 1 person is dying, and that is less bad than 5 people dying. And most people have some severe issues with that particular conclusion, and there is lots of discussion about why that may not be, in fact, the optimal thing to do.
This is typically the second question asked in a chain of questions that when they put people to the experiment, either under fMRI or however, the first question is much less controversial. You're standing by the switch on a railroad, and for some reason, down one way, the way that the train is currently going, you see 5 people chained to the train tracks, and then if you pull the switch, the train will diverge and go down another track where there's 1 person tied to the train tracks. Most people will say, yeah, I'll pull the switch. 5's better than 1. When it comes to pushing someone in front of the train, or trolley, because 1 person couldn't stop a train, but trolley is more believable. People have a gut instinct and reaction against taking an active hand in murdering somebody as opposed to a passive one. So I think it's something like 95, it's some overwhelming majority of people will pull the switch and move the train from one to the other. But it's radically less than a quarter, I think, of people will push the person.
Yeah. And mainly I just bring that up to demonstrate that it isn't always naturally intuitive that utilitarianism is the best way to do things.
But I think 90% of the time, most people lean utilitarian.
I don't think they do. I think people who think about it may, but deontology also has some strong arguments to it, and there's a lot of different ethical systems out there.
We should point out that in the less wrong community, right, you've got, I think on the show notes for your last show, you gave kind of a breakdown of different ethical different schools of ethics that the less wrong community believes in, and it's mostly consequentialist, which I think it's fair to say that most utilitarians are consequentialists, and then it's got a very small percentage of deontologists.
The thing with deontology that always bugged me was that Kant didn't pick his rules arbitrarily and then say, you have to do those things. He chose consequentialist arguments and then say, you have to do those all the time.
Right.
So it starts with consequentialist reasoning and then just says no rule breaking.
Yeah.
But yeah, we could do our own long episode on ethics if we want.
Right. We are not here about ethics. We're here about killing all the humans, which has nothing to do with ethical theory.
Or does it?
we just push somebody into a train, so.
To save 5 more, though.
Yeah.
Would you push everyone in front of a train to save nobody?
Well, seems like a trick question, Brian.
Well, what if those...
Stephen,
Jesus
Christ, why did I just call you Brian? Did I do that before?
What if those 5 people were in severe pain?
And it would actually make their lives better because they would no longer have negative utility?
Right.
It's a reason a lot of people choose to, commit suicide if they're already terminally ill and in a lot of pain. And they're like, the rest of my life is just going to be pain. I should probably stop it now.
The important caveat, I think, between the word suicide and euthanasia is that if you're just suicidal, my life's pain, and that's how you're feeling at the time, and that things can't get better, but that's just kind of how your mental state is. But that's not necessarily the case. You could be, treated and felt better. Whether or not you're sick or or whether or not, I guess, you have a deteriorating illness or a mental illness, if you have a prospect of getting better, I become less and less in favor of euthanasia/suicide.
That's a difficult call to make, though. I mean, I am with you because I am a very optimistic, hopeful person, and I think, yeah, there's always hope. But it is a difficult call to make because you can't. A lot of mental disorders don't map well. You can't see, what the prognosis is. And so for someone to say you're definitely going to get better is not necessarily true. This could be a case where someone is just going to be in pain forever, and maybe it would be better for them to kill themselves. It's why we got to put trigger notes for suicide on this episode, because I hate saying that. And I don't think it's true in general, but I have to admit that in theory it is possible that there are people who will have negative net utility throughout that, from now to the rest of their lives.
But at that point, it's like a guessing game, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
So you're saying no, there is a chance if you have a major depressive disorder that no therapy will have any improvement for you.
Right.
Anything from, the smallest dose of Cymbalta to straight up to lobotomy, nothing's going to make you any better. So there might be a human on Earth that's true for. But that's different than saying, like, you're dying of cancer, you've got 6 weeks to live, we've exhausted all the options, it's just going to get worse and you're going to die. Well, at that point, it's kind of like, well, can I check myself out now? I say yes.
Oh, I totally agree, but the precautionary principle generally says that if you aren't sure, you err on the side of not killing yourself.
Agreed.
But, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to make that a law and deny the people that option, because then you're just saying, I know you better than you do, which maybe is the case, but isn't always. Like, I know you're going to get better, and my judgment overrules your judgment, even though you are the person who generally has the best insight into your own brain. And in that case, I kind of think the precautionary principle almost says, don't interfere with other people's decisions.
I wouldn't say that I know better than someone does, but I would say that I think there's a good chance, and until you've tried everything, it's probably worth it, because you just don't know what you're missing.
Yeah.
Once you get through a depressive disorder, things become much more enjoyable. And then when you're in the midst of it, the idea of like, why would I want to keep doing this, just seems like a natural thought. But then you don't realize that that's part of what being depressed is.
And I want to say I'm not encouraging suicide in any way, because when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I was extremely suicidal, and I came very close to death a couple times. And so I'm about to agree with a lot of things you're going to say, because I felt all those things too. So, but now I'm much happier with life, and on the whole, I'm extremely glad that I stuck it out, because things have gotten amazing, and I'm extremely happy. And
what exactly is your socioeconomic status?
I currently make above the median income
numbers.
Our country. I make slightly above the median income for the country, America.
And you're white, people would identify as male, at least?
Yes, I am a white male. I am extremely privileged. I'm basically straight. I'm cis. I look like a normal person. I don't have any major disabilities. So
if I had to take a guess as to whether or not you were going to be happy and know nothing else about you other than that, I'd probably say that you're going to be happy. You're at least going to give yourself a 7, which is kind of the number that the like world happiness values, like that the UN does in Protestant countries and higher income countries.
Are you basing that number off of statistics you read? I'm pretty sure that depressive disorders are less common among developing countries and among a lot of poor populations. That it's a lot. Once you have like the affluence and luxury to be depressed, then that's when you get depressed.
Yeah, you might have more depression, but as far as people just rating their happiness as on a 0 to 10, which is obviously not fallible, you generally range between 4 and like up to 8 in some like Sweden and Finland, whereas places like Jordan and Greece isn't pretty good right now either.
Even considering that those places have a lot of high rates of depression.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. That's kind of interesting. I wonder. I guess I'll have to look into it more. If you can find a link.
Yeah, we can put on it's UN. The UN puts out a report every couple of years.
Oh, okay. I would just like to see how they phrase the questions.
We're going to totally apply you for links after this, because that's what we like to do with our show notes.
Sure.
Tons of links.
As long as we're still starting out a little bit, do you want to talk about it yourself at all, or how you came to be in the recording studio?
So like how I came to push the button. Oh, that's a good title right there.
That is a good title.
Or how I came to the room,
or a little just about you, if you want to talk about you. Or
I entered a code into the front door, and then I followed the elevator up to the east hallway, and then
I believe technically Stephen entered the code.
Yeah.
No, start from birth. We're gonna do it. Come on.
Yeah.
So there I was in my mom's uterus, just kind of chilling.
My rationalist history is I was baptized Catholic. When I was 14, I read the Bible and didn't make sense. And that seems to be a common enough jumping off point for a lot of rationalists. So I jumped into existentialism and nihilism and throughout like high school. And then through enough willpower, I eventually settled on some objective realities. In this case, the existentialists and the nihilists took hold, and that's where I get my utilitarianism, is that it's the problem that most mainstream utilitarianism has is that it values positivity too much. So you have these utility monsters, which the concept there is, you said, let's say we give everybody or let's break it down into money, right? Let's say we want to raise the happiness of everybody, so we split the money equally, right? The problem is that doesn't make everybody happy, because some people like money a lot more. So you should give all your money to them, which means, the spikes happen there. So you have Inuyasha, who really likes money. And so
Why do I really like money?
and so it's, I'm the salesman, so I guess I like money more. So I like money way more than you guys do. So you guys should just be broke. And even though you'll be unhappy being, below the poverty line, or in this case, I've taken all your money because I love money so much. If we're taking the aggregate or the average, it's super high because I have all the money, and money makes me really happy. So the problem with a lot of utilitarian arguments is that they end like that.
So even if we have negative 100 utility each, you've got like 10,000 utility.
Right.
So yeah, both aggregate and average is much higher than it would be if the money was split evenly.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the best criticisms of utilitarianism that can sort of stand is that consider individuals. It considers the broad scope, and so in many aspects it can be considered to fail because it doesn't consider individual people. And so, like you said, the differences between people means that they'll value things differently, and that treating everyone the same and doing it like that doesn't work.
Well, and our aggregates, is the problem I came to is happiness equal to unhappiness, right? Is pain and suffering, does it have an equivalent to happiness? And I'd like to say, so just because when you're happy, it means you're not unhappy, but it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. And so I split the two, and I say, instead of just having an overall aggregate where you can have these utility monsters, we should put more weight on the pain and suffering. Because when I was trying to come up with my objective reality, the only thing I could really find that was universal was that pain and suffering is bad, right? So,
did you find the corollary true, that happiness and pleasure is good?
It's good,
but not
it's
as good as suffering is bad?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you have a breakdown? I think, like you said, it's like a 1-to-1. Do you have like a 3-to-1, or do you just kind of say it's just worse, like to some extent?
Nope. It's just weighted. It's just more weighted on the negative side.
Fair enough.
So if we take that to a large scale, we end up pushing the button. On a smaller scale, the goal should be to decrease pain and suffering, right? To make the world suck less. But the reason that you had me on today is because when you take that to a large enough scale and you have the option to push the button, my moral philosophy would say that you should definitely push the button, because then you're going to guarantee that there is no more pain and suffering in the world. Like, what if I just came up to you and without any kind of context said, I have a button that can get rid of all pain and suffering in the world?
I can now see why you like sales. We don't just have you on because you push the button. By the way, this button that we're talking about kills everybody or all life on Earth?
Right, that's the trick. It has to destroy all life on Earth. Okay. I think a lot of the VIB, I don't remember what the acronym stands for.
Voluntary Human Extinction Movement.
Their big deal is that the human race should, voluntarily get rid of itself, and that does not go far enough for me, because I think in a relatively, or at least in a universally relatively short enough amount of time, something else is going to evolve, and it's going to suffer just as much, if not worse. And on the way there, it's definitely going to go through something like we went through, which
So
200,000 years of shit.
yeah,
I want to interject really quick that we're not just having you on because you press that button. We're also having you on because you're a cool dude. So,
I am a cool dude.
There we go.
yeah.
All
Well, there's a bunch of cool ideas that I want to process, like why happiness is less weighted than, or why suffering is weighted higher than happiness. But before we get into any of that, the very last thing you said, that you would want to wipe out all life because eventually something would evolve up to human levels again and have the same amount of suffering that we have. Which, first of all, was also the conclusion I came to when I was in your position. But it brings up the interesting question: humans feel a uniquely high amount of suffering, then, in your opinion, because of our ability to self-reflect and be conscious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You have creatures that don't respond to any kind of stimuli, right? Mm-hmm. You have higher level creatures that'll, we're saying higher level just for because we're egocentric, closer to us.
I am more than happy to call that higher level.
You have higher level things that do respond to stimuli, and then you have things that have physical pain, and then you get to us that has mental pain, and then I would have a sinking fear that if there doesn't already exist, there would exist in the future some kind of pain that is worse than a mental pain that maybe we just can't perceive. Or that
because we're not smart enough yet.
Because if you think how pain comes along, right? It's moving us to not die and spread our genes, right? And then once we figured out how to stop being in pain, something else had to come along to make us not die and spread our genes, and that was mental anguish, right? So you have societies that come together, and you want the society to succeed, and so then you have mental anguish. So I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't give this a high probability, but I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't some kind of greater pain that was past that, maybe like an empathic pain that, we could certainly end towards, right?
I suppose if it is just outside of our conception, then I'll agree, but it seems like between physical pain and mental pain, we've covered the two kinds of things that there are, right? So either something's going on in just your, in your mind or in your body, and it's affecting your mind. But other than that, to postulate a third kind of pain might be to suggest some third kind of thing.
Well, the ant can't fathom mental pain.
Right.
So your position is that pain is inevitable as you get smarter. The more conscious you are, the more pain there will be, and there's no way around this. There's no way a life form as advanced as us could evolve without having that sort of pain.
No way around it. We could certainly work towards it. That's ideally what I'd like to see. In fact, an empathic pain might make us better people. But I could certainly see in the future ways that we can get around both physical and mental pain. But as it is, and the way that evolution seems to produce creatures, at least on the Earth, pain is a driving force for the changing of a species.
I just last week stumbled across an article about aversion learning AIs, which artificial systems which are goal driven, and the way they learn is when they fail to meet their goals, they're given a disincentive. It's not pain in the technical sense, but it is a situation they want to avoid, and apparently that really helps with learning. And I was like, there is absolutely no way that aversion-driven learning can go wrong. Well, we should totally pursue this.
It also doesn't work in child rearing, as it turns out.
No.
So even when rearing humans or dogs, it's better to reward good behavior.
Well,
so
it seems to work in image recognition, though.
That's a should.
But I think a thumbs up would work. I guess we're talking about alien minds, so who knows? But I feel like, especially if we're gonna try and scale this all the way up to super intelligence, let's choose one that we made happy and not made sad the whole way on its way to godhood.
Right. Yeah, I know. Sadness and pain seems to be very powerful motivators.
Could we create a program that did not, that was not advanced by pain and suffering? Yeah, I think we could do that. Okay. But then we get into transhumanism, and then we're destroying all humans anyway, right?
Oh, just in a different way.
Yeah.
Okay. So you wouldn't be against destroying all humans by evolving into a transhumanist. Or not evolving, but developing into a post-humanity.
No, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Okay. That's interesting, because I thought that you were That like the kill all humans was your ideal solution, or kill all things.
No, it's not the ideal solution. It's a hypothetical. It's if I had the button that like plummets the Earth into the sun, would I push it? Yeah, but
now
until then, I would like to find more productive ways that don't end up killing everything on
Oh no,
everything
and we should
Earth.
totally talk about that too, because you're one of the few actual effective altruists that I know in real life.
Mhm.
But by saying that if you had that button right now, you would plunge the Earth into the sun, isn't that also implicitly saying that you see that there is an extremely small chance that we'll ever get there, and it's overwhelmingly more likely that we'll be suffering forever? Because you're basically killing all future inhabitants of the Earth as well when you push that button.
Right. And I would, if I had to put a probability on it, I would say that that things are going to get better. I mean, currently they're getting better for humans, and we've got more and more cows that are suffering and stuff like that. But I think in general the everything will get better, but there will also be more people. And so when we're adding up remember that we're separating the columns here. When we're adding up all pain and suffering, we might have an overwhelming amount of happiness, but just because we're going to be having a lot more people as well. I mean, if I could eliminate that column is what I want to do.
Okay.
Right? If I can make sure that nobody would have to ever again, at least as far as Earth goes, I would certainly do that, right?
So you've read Those Who Walk Away from Amalis, then?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a very short story about an ideal town of, I don't know, a few thousand people, and it is basically utopia. Everyone is entirely happy. Life is fulfilling and wonderful, except in the basement of one house, there is a child that lives in abject horror and pain and suffering, and it does that for, its entire life, and there always has to be one of that. And the story is basically about there are some people who, when they find that out, leave the village and never come back. Because regardless of how much total happiness there is in the village, it cannot make up for that one child's worth of suffering.
Right.
So are you saying that if the entire planet was really happy and utopic and very fulfilled with their entire lives, and then there was like one old dude who was kind of curmudgeonly and grumpy and said, TV really sucks. I cannot watch anything that's good. And my leg hurts, and life is awful, and I wish I was dead. Yeah. You're willing to kill the entire human race so that amount of suffering doesn't exist.
Can I just get rid of him?
No.
I can't get rid of him?
No.
Well, see, then I have to have a coefficient. Then I have to have for that I have to know how much pain there is, how much suffering there is, and how equal they are, right? How correlated they are.
So there is a level of suffering you're willing to accept if there's enough happiness to balance it out.
That's a rough one. Yeah. I at that point, if it was the entire world and then one curmudgeonly old man, I would hesitate to push the button.
Okay. One curmudgeonly old man and 3 really sick, cancerous children.
Yeah. Then the button gets pushed.
Oh shit. 2 cancerous children?
I didn't have to push that very far.
But we don't have that. Just like we don't have the button, right? I think a lot of a nuke certainly wouldn't do that.
Right.
It would have to be something that would destroy the Earth or the sun in order to do that. I mean, if whenever we take things to extremes, they're difficult. That's how we get to the button, right? Because we take utilitarianism, we say, what happens when you make the extremes, right? And that's what we do. I mean, that's a good way to, that's a good tool in general, right? And so in physics, when you're testing things out, you put big numbers in, you put small numbers in, you say, does this work in both these? Yeah. Okay. I believe it's the correspondence principle in quantum mechanics. You say, okay, when we put the numbers into quantum mechanical equations, do they turn into classical mechanics, right? Because if they don't, then they can't be true. Right. So taking things to the extreme is a really good tool just in general.
Going to hyperbole is one of my favorite intuition pumps just in general. Sort of like slippery sloping someone's argument or strawmanning it. If done responsibly, it can be a good intuition pump.
Yeah.
You say, okay, well, if we turned this up to 11, would things still make sense? And if the answer is no, that's a good indication that they wouldn't make sense at whatever level someone's proposing it at.
Yeah, you are definitely more extreme than I was, or that I thought you were, because originally I had thought, when I was in the same, yes, I would like to destroy all humans phase, I was of the opinion that it was impossible for there to be more happiness than there is suffering. And at the time, I hadn't read this because I don't think it had actually been written at the time. But there's a great post over at The View from Hell called The Transdimensional Justice Monster, which it posits a godlike being that can alter where utility is to make the universe as net positive as possible. That there may be more suffering in the past, but that leads to greater happiness in the future due to gains from productivity, or like the Industrial Revolution. It was kind of shitty to be a factory worker. Like, really fucking shitty. You died from black lung, you got rickets, you got to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, so on and so forth. But it led to so much economic growth that the great-great-grandchildren of those workers are in a much better position. Now they, can sit in a cushy air-conditioned office and work, 12, 15 hours a week and surf the net for the rest of the time. Mm-hmm. But,
there's probably more happiness than unhappiness.
Okay.
I think it's gotten better. I think that it's gotten...
The Transdimensional Justice Monster post was basically arguing that when you even everything out, that, we had to take our happiness by making the past more miserable, that we take our happiness in the developed world by stealing resources and happiness from the undeveloped world, and no matter how you try to balance things, no matter how you shake it out, net utility across the entire species, across all time, is always negative. That you cannot get more happiness than pain and as a total. And so the best solution is always to wipe out all life, because net utility is always negative. And that is like what I consider the strong form of the argument, but the fact that you're saying that even a tiny amount of suffering overcomes all happiness, that's like really strange. Why do you value suffering so much more than happiness?
Because it's the only thing that I could find that was intuitive. Maybe intuitive is the wrong word. Because it used to be, I think it's the only thing that we can agree on, right? I don't mean everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You were going to find people who, think that pain and suffering is the way, and that it's valuable, and I'd argue that it might be necessary in some circumstances. But I think it's the only thing that we can universally agree on, at least as a human species, which is what defines ethics that is bad.
I was going to make an argument that then made me sound like someone could just change a couple words and make it sound like a defense of the problem, or a defense of evil, like,
Mm-hmm.
And the problem of evil with religion.
Mm-hmm.
But then I just realized that we can just look at it a little differently and say, so one of the comebacks to the problem of evil in religion, which is the problem of, if you take the Christian God as traditionally conceived, how do you justify the existence of the amount of evil that there is in the world?
Mm-hmm.
If God's supposed to be all-powerful and all-knowing, why doesn't he go out there and fix things, or at least not let bad things happen?
And benevolent, you have to have benevolent for the third horn.
Right, yeah. So one of the comebacks is, well, suffering is good because it contrasts with bad, or excuse me, suffering contrasts with pleasure and lets you appreciate pleasure more. And I was going to say something to that extent, but then I realized that made me sound like a evil apologist. So to bring it home,
or an apologist for evil.
The rejoinder to that then is, why is there so much suffering? Couldn't every human learn how great it is to not be in pain just by stubbing their toe once in their life, rather than like getting their arm blown off and then having phantom limb pain for the remaining 60 years? So that's the classic rejoinder to the comeback of, well, suffering is good because it makes people appreciate not suffering more. So,
have you seen Scott Alexander's reply to that?
I haven't.
Oh, it's the most brilliant thing in the world.
Let's hear it.
Okay, and I find it really ironic that an atheist had to come up with the only good rebuttal to this. But it takes place in the form of a conversation between Job and God, because that's the kind of guy Scott Alexander is. And if you're familiar with the Bible story, Job basically asks God, why is there suffering in the world? Why do good people suffer? And God says, hey, did you make the world and cause the sun to rise? No, shut the fuck up.
and it was basically, in the Bible, it was basically a bet with Satan, too.
Yes.
And it was like, I'll bet this guy will still love me if I fuck with him. Bet's on, bro. And then he keeps fucking with him more and more. And Job still's devoted, so.
Yeah, but the core of the story is, why do bad things happen to good people? And the answer is, because I'm, fuck you.
Because we have the capacity to feel bad.
Yeah. But in the rewritten conversation between Job and God that Scott Alexander wrote, Job asks God, why can't you just make a world where everyone is happy and there is no pain? And God says, I did that. Job's like, no, there's a lot of pain. And God's like, no, not this world. There's a different world where there's all happiness, no pain. Everything's great. It's like, oh, well, why did you make another world? It's like, well, I thought, this is a lot of people, but I could make an entire world where there's tons of happiness and just like someone stubs their toe once in all of human history. And think of how much more happiness that is for just a tiny bit of pain. Totally worth it. So I did that. I made so much more happiness. I was like, well, could I make a world where just 2 people stub their toes? And so on and so forth. And basically it takes the quantum multi-world hypothesis that every world that can exist does exist, except it takes it that every world where there is more net positive utility than net negative utility exists. And God's like, I'm sorry, you happen to be in one of the worlds where it's kind of right on the edge, and there's only a little bit more happiness than sadness. But, take it to heart. Feel happy inside, because in the human race, the species across all time, there will be more happiness than sadness overall. And so, therefore, it's better for this world to have existed than not.
That does ring a bell, and I remember when you mentioned the many universes, I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
So, but then I guess to bring that analogy home, which is where I was trying to bring it. So, say if we could make everyone on Earth as happy as Enosh.
Yeah.
That may not be happy enough.
Well, but is that happy enough? You admit yourself fairly happy most of the time.
Fairly happy most of the time, yes.
So if we could put everybody at the top of the hedonic treadmill?
Well, I mean, they can't all fit at the top, but just to raise how. Oh yeah, right. Depending on politics, of course they can. Like Stephen Colbert, I won't rest till everyone's in the upper 1%.
Right.
So, but no, I guess just to raise so that to make Enosh the saddest person on Earth. Right? So would that be happy enough?
Would what? Would
you still push the button in that situation? So with someone with a fairly high level of professed happiness, if that's the saddest person on Earth and the animal equivalency jumps up as well, would you still condemn it to be pushed into the sun? If you could.
I'd be pretty happy with that Earth.
So that sounds like a more attainable bar, I think, than,
I mean, am I guaranteed that it's going to remain like that forever?
No. But, I mean, let's say the odds are 9 in 10 that it'll remain like that till the end of the universe.
Yeah, okay, so this is where you get at it, right? So you've got decision theory where you take your utility and you multiply it times the percentage that it'll happen, right? I mean, this is kind of in standard game theory, and so I think what I'm doing when I'm saying I'm pushing the button is I'm taking that unhappiness, that pain and suffering, and I'm taking the small percentage that it'll continue or that it exists at all anyway, and I'm multiplying that times the negative utility. And that negative utility, like pain and suffering, like imagine just the worst thing you can. Like just take a person.
50 years of torture.
Just the entirety of torture in a dark room, something like that. Like it gets close, it approaches negative infinity. And so no matter what you multiply it times, I mean, that's going to be like for me that I can't not push the button because I have the possibility that's going to happen. Now,
wow.
Yeah, right. Because you have, I mean, like if I could prevent 50 years of torture, like, I don't know. I just can't fathom not pushing the button in that situation, no matter what else it entailed.
And this isn't just really quick. This isn't an endorsement of any suicidal propositions, but there's a non-zero chance that someone is going to pick you up on your drive home today and torture you for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. What's to make you decide to not take your own pill before you leave the room, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to talk you into it, for the love of God.
So how do I cognitive dissonance is how I do that.
But you would condemn humanity to non-existence on the small.
I don't condemn them.
Well, you would reward them with non-existence at the small chance that everything could get really bad and stay that way, versus not extrapolating that to like a case by case basis.
Yeah.
Okay. So just cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, right? Like if I want to continue, I have to pretend that doesn't exist, right? I mean,
fair enough.
I also don't have any free will, so like that's just how I continue living.
Right, and I maybe shouldn't have said that because I guess I was just.
This is a dark episode.
It kind of is.
Dark episode.
Maybe it won't make it out. It probably will. Trigger warnings on it.
Right, definitely.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to be a dick. I'm trying to better understand it. So, like.
No, you're not trying to be a dick. You're just trying to say, why don't you kill yourself, Stephen?
That's not where I was going. So one of the reasons I don't kill myself is because I assign a very, very low probability to the chance that I'll live the rest of my life in abject horror.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're saying that on the chance that humanity as a whole or life on Earth as a whole there's a small chance that it can live abject horror forever, that would justify ceasing its existence.
Well, this is a closed system too, right? So like, I'm just confining it to me. If I were to kill myself, I would create a lot of pain and suffering in the world.
Oh yeah. So it's predicated on you wouldn't press a button that would kill half of everybody.
But would you cause...
Yeah, it would. I have to get every form of life and everything that could possibly, like, I have to even get, like amino acids, right? I have to destroy the ocean. You gotta plummet the earth.
You would have to wink out the whole universe then too, huh?
But
I can hope that everyone else will push the button too.
Is the amount of suffering that you would cause by killing yourself today greater than the amount of suffering multiplied by the probability of it happening, of you being tortured for the rest of your life, another 50 years?
Well, let's see. If we take the... you can't multiply infinities, right?
I'm kind of worried how far we want to push this.
We push it all the way, Stephen. We do not stop until we hit the wall.
So
push
it all the way so Jason doesn't leave this room, right?
What if my killing myself made 5 other people just extremely depressed for the rest of their life? Or what if what if I killed myself in such a traumatic manner or something that would give people PTSD or anytime they heard that? I'm not saying that people love me so that much that every time they heard my name they would just break down, but it's a closed system. So that's why we have to, in the button is the entire system. We're not taking other life forms into consideration, anything that might exist on another planet or whatever, but the button is because it's everything, right? It's everything that can no longer feel. I can guarantee 0. I take that. Yeah.
Fair enough. And yeah, so that sounds like a good counter argument to anyone who I'm trying to...
I don't think your argument holds, though, that suffering is worth that much more than happiness. Because even though you say everyone can agree suffering and pain are bad, I mean, yes, sure, but pretty much everyone can also agree that happiness is good.
Yeah.
So just because everyone can agree that suffering is bad doesn't mean that you shouldn't count happiness.
Pain feels worse.
Does it?
I think pain feels worse than happiness. I would rather...
I think pain actually has the same hedonic treadmill problem that happiness does. Because I've been in... I mean, just in terms of physical pain, I've gone through some surgeries before, and the recovery was fucking horrendous. Yeah. I felt like Han Solo when he was being tortured in Star Wars, It was awful. I took some painkillers and it went away. But before they kicked in, several times a day for about a week, it was insane amounts of pain. And now I don't, remember it at all. I mean, I vaguely remember that it happened, but it doesn't register. It fades into the background and you quickly get over it. I hear that's the same reason women have more than one child. Because despite the intense agony of childbirth, eventually... the pain just kind of recedes into the background. You're like, okay, whatever. It's the same treadmill.
Well, women have more than one children because, they've evolved to forget the pain that they went through.
Yeah, we've all evolved to forget the pain we've gone through.
Which means that, if it's such a...
if happiness doesn't count because we forget it, doesn't pain also not count because we forget it?
But the fact that it has to be forgotten for anyone to exist, doesn't that kind of speak... something to the magnitude of pain?
No. I think you should count the pain as it's happening, but it shouldn't count forever there afterwards.
But you don't remember it. And we're also continued self here.
Yeah.
Like the person who went through that pain, certainly, they experienced that. I wouldn't consider the person who went through the pain the same person who is now happy and doesn't remember the pain.
Right.
It's a very... kind of selfish thing. When you have a child, you're going to say, I want a child at the moment, but I'm not really. You're not getting consent from that future person.
Right. I don't see how that is a argument for saying that pain is so much more of a consideration, though. Just because.
Oh no, that was a tangent.
Oh, that was a tangent.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Oh, shock.
Yeah. I don't really have a. Okay. I don't have a solid argument for it. Okay. Yeah. These are very, and these are kind of very loose. When we get to the extreme hypotheticals, they're very loose ideas because we're never actually going to experience such hypotheticals.
Yeah.
Unless anybody out there has the button.
If anyone out there has a button and presents to Jason, we are ethically obligated, Stephen and me, to kill one or the other of you, because I am not down with total genocide of the human race.
I think both, just to be safe.
But yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And even like I would still say that the percentage, the probability of there being, I think that there's more happiness. Like it's tough to, like we can take surveys and it's tough to involve any kind of animals, but I think that there's more happiness. That's just a hunch and based on a couple of like world happiness surveys. But even like, I think that there's a very small percentage that a very small chance that things will get worse. And I'm fairly optimistic that at some point pain and suffering will cease to exist. But you know, if I had it now, does that happen quick enough? Does that happen soon enough? Do we get to the point where we're all as happy as Inuyasha? Do we all get?
I'm
do
really
we?
uncomfortable with being our baseline for a happy person.
I think you're the happiest person in the room.
Am I? Well, I'm sure I'm happier than Jason.
Apparently, because I
based
am
on a conversation.
Yeah.
But I am uncomfortable with being called the happiest person because despite the fact that I am happy often, I am not happy all the time by any means.
Let's backtrack a little bit and say that we were at the point where talking about as happy as you can get, maybe like not theoretical maximum, but like happiest non-diagnosably or happiest neurotypical person, right? So there's probably somebody out there with the opposite of depression where their happiness is just, it wavers between 9 and 10. They're just doing great. But that stuff doesn't get diagnosed because you don't go to a shrink's office to complain about it. So,
there's a manic pixie dream girl out there, you're saying?
What?
There's a manic pixie dream girl out there in the real world?
Probably.
Okay.
What's that?
Oh, you aren't familiar with the manic pixie dream girl trope?
No.
Oh, okay. I'll have to link it to you then. It's basically every movie made by a middle-aged white guy where a depressed, mopey, kind of college-age white guy runs into, and you know, like very straight-laced business, serious kind of type, but just not happy with his life, runs into this girl who's just free and one with nature and does whatever she wants, and she's like, oh, let's go have crepes because I see crepes over there, and just always manic happy pixie dream girl.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, now I can picture some examples from stuff I've seen. So
Okay.
yeah, yes, those people.
Okay.
So they're probably, I don't know. This is getting way too.
They're probably non-existent.
Well,
Probably.
we don't. Well, they're not in the DSM. It's not a disorder because it doesn't affect your life in any
adverse way.
right.
Exactly. So this whole giant tangent came about because Inuyasha didn't want to be the
happiest person in the room.
happiest person in the room. But so that's fine. Now I can't remember where I was going with that. It's been 5 minutes that I derailed us. I'm sorry.
How about this? How about Can we work backwards? We can say, how about
Let's do it.
if you are starting from the people who would push the button, right, in this extreme hypothetical. I'd like to point out I know that there is a movement out there. I think this just came up in conversation, right? Like it was that my opening line was, hey, would you kill all of life on Earth if you could?
Uh-huh.
But like these are, I don't even give them a lot of thought because they're just so like that's not going to happen. I'd give it 0.
Mm-hmm.
We can work backwards and say, well, what can we do to reduce pain and suffering, even if you don't, from the point of view of people who are going to value pain and suffering over happiness as far as like a negative utility goes. How do they live their life, right? So I think something I would have in common with the vehement movement would be stop having as many babies, right?
As many or a period?
Well, Vehement would say period,
Right.
but as many is a step up in their opinion.
Okay.
Well, we can get to
It's better than having 20 babies.
the point where resources balance out, or at least resource distribution balances out. Right? But you see this in advanced you see this in places that are happy anyway, right? The higher the income gets, the fewer children people tend to have.
Yes.
So I mean, don't contribute to unwanted children in the world. I take the stance of effective altruism, right? So we can do things that reduce the amount of pain and suffering, and that's in the case of effective altruism, giving to effective charities. We don't need as much money as we make, and we can comfortably give chunks of that away to organizations that strictly turn that money into less pain and suffering.
We should quickly define effective altruism because I'm sure not every listener is familiar with it. First of all, the effective part generally means that you compare charities and you give money to the one that does the most good per dollar.
Yeah, if you have two choices, this is the consequentialist, right?
Yes.
The ends.
If you could spend $10,000 to save one life or $10,000 to save 3 lives, you give to the charity that can save 3 lives with the $10,000.
Yeah.
Or, as some of the best charities go, if you could give $10,000 to save 35,000 lives, right?
I don't think it's that much.
How much does malaria net cost?
I believe that
$3 to $5.
Yeah, I believe that the standard currently the standard estimate is saving a life costs between $1,000 and $2,000.
Okay, I was thinking back to the 1976 essay by Peter Singer, 1975
right.
or 6 or 7 or 8.
We don't need to worry about lives though. We're worried about pain and suffering.
Yes.
Oh,
right?
sure.
So if we're deworming children, that's like 35 cents a pop. If we are talking about mosquito nets, that's $3 to $5 per mosquito net, and that can reduce a huge amount of pain and suffering. Plus, it then allows more stable households when your parents aren't dying of malaria or your siblings aren't dying of malnutrition. They can go to school. They can make more money. They can then increase the overall happiness of themselves and their loved ones and all the people in their area for 35 cents a pop.
Right. And the essay I was thinking of was called Famine, Affluence, and Morality. I couldn't get the title of one of his newer books called The Life You Can Save out of my head, and I knew that wasn't it. So we can link to Famine, Affluence, and Morality on the website if you want to. It talked me into becoming a charitable person when I was 18. I read it the same week I read All Lives Are Equal, or was that it? All Animals Are Equal. And that week I became a vegetarian for like 5 years. So, I found it very persuasive. Not everyone responds to argument the same way when it comes to these sorts of things, but I think effective altruism is, first of all, a much happier topic for the second half of the episode.
Yeah.
And second of all, it's one of those things that is so, I think, obviously clear for anybody who agrees that charity at all is an okay thing or is a desirable thing, but there's still a lot of kickback to it, which is weird. People get, I think, indignant.
I remember seeing someone complaining that the effective altruism was taking money away from arts like opera and sculpture in the cities.
And I would come right back to that person and say, yeah, it's giving it right into the lives of people who need who need life saving.
I think the more interesting part of it, I mean, all that is interesting too, but I think perhaps the most interesting thing about effective altruism is the earning to give mentality. Where it is considered a very high value, a very ethically good thing for a person to do to get the job that pays them the most that they can possibly swing with their skills, and then donate a large portion of that directly as money to effective charities.
As long as your job does not
make the world worse
make
itself.
The world a lot worse, which can be difficult when pain and suffering pays, right? Like as a salesman, I want to find products that don't cause more suffering than offset by the income I'm going to make by selling those things.
Yeah. I don't remember which way the equation came down, but I do remember someone looked into whether becoming the CEO of a tobacco company and donating 99% of your earnings was a net positive or not.
Yeah.
That sounds like a fun. See, that's what I like jumping to hyperbole, but this is real life hyperbole. That's awesome.
Oh man, I could smoke like cigarettes for malaria. Wouldn't that just be a great campaign?
Oh man.
If
every time you light up, you're saving a child's life.
$3 from every pack you buy goes to save this kid, and put a picture of some. Oh my gosh.
Camel or Marlboro wants to kind of come up with a new advertising campaign. I think they just found it. We could. How about this? We could cut the tobacco. We could cut sin taxes, and we could take. We could keep the same tax in there, but just have that go to. Isn't that what sin tax does anyway? It's totally what sin tax does.
It's just not what sin tax does.
It's just not very effective.
Yes, they do not target the money usually very well.
Yeah.
That still sounds awesome. But I think so. Some of the kickback. So I guess there is someone complains about arts and opera or something, which seems maybe about a little more defensible than some of the other kickback you get from people. So the effective altruist, if you're straw manning the person, could be like, oh, so you're saying the fact that I give money to my local animal shelter isn't enough? And so the effective altruist would be like, kinda.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some people find it indignant to challenge them and say, sorry, your impulse to charity just isn't good enough. It's not well calibrated. Do charity better. And people find that insulting. So I don't. I think it's fine. I would rather be pointed out. Like if I was giving all my money to, name a popular but shitty charity.
I can actually
you might lose some sponsors here.
I can name a charity. Actually, I cannot say the name of the charity because I don't know the name. But there's a charity that every year comes to my work and takes volunteers, and my workplace will pay people just their regular wages to go and work at this charity for one day a year if they want to. What they do is they take 2 blankets and they cut fringes along the edges and then they tie them together. That's the charity.
Yeah.
That feels like an anti-charity to me. It is taking productive hours that those people could have used at a charity that actually does some good to tie 2 blankets. What do you get out of 2 blankets tied together that you wouldn't have just from layering one blanket on top of another blanket?
How about like the Catholic Church?
I mean, it looks prettier.
Can we go to, tithing, right?
Right.
So like that's how I started giving, was I said, okay, well, let me see what's doable. Let me do 10%, right? And so that's because that's a tithe.
Yeah.
So if you're tithing to the Catholic Church, where is that money? What is it going to? How much pain and suffering is it reducing? But that's probably one of the biggest, one of the worst charities that you give to. If you want to come up with something a little less agreeable, you could say things that go to fight climate change, right? So dollar per dollar, money that goes to maybe research, but try to stop climate change is being spent very poorly, partially because we don't have a
cost-effective.
Yeah, we don't have a cost-effective way to fix it, and that's the other thing, right? Like, do you pour all your money into one big thing that could possibly reduce pain and suffering on a large scale, or put it into a guaranteed, nets and water and food and education? I think the general idea of the effective altruism movement is that we pour our money into the things that we know we can fix that are guaranteed.
Yeah.
Right.
So things that reduce suffering.
Yeah.
It's an interesting case because it feels like you're at least being consistent that something like donating to the arts or opera is something that would increase happiness, but you're more concerned about reducing suffering. So at least you get props for being consistent.
Well, it's interesting. So like the stop climate change dollar per dollar ineffectiveness is one example, but as long as I think for me, that's something I'm still sort of undecided on. So I tend to split my charity budget between like the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, which stands a non-zero chance of more or less creating utopia in the next century, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something like GiveWell or the Against Malaria Foundation, where I'm saving literal lives and reducing suffering, I guess not today, but however long it takes that money to get out there. So on one hand, it's a payoff between a bet of some probability that this is going to make everything awesome forever versus I'm at least doing some solid concrete work today.
I also want to maybe point out that I think Miri's goal isn't necessarily to usher in utopia, but to prevent unfriendly AI from destroying everything.
Fair enough. I think related to that is creating friendly AI that could make things better.
I've got a hypothetical for you, Stephen. Let's say that there's a machine that will create utopia, right? It's going to, is this for people, or is this more of on a transhumanist kind of thing?
Yes to both.
Yes to both.
Do you not consider transhumanists people?
I mean, by definition, wouldn't they not be? Well, they wouldn't be human.
No, they wouldn't be human, but they'd still be people.
I don't know what the definition of people is.
I think a people is, depending on which moral philosopher you ask, it's a being that's inside your moral sphere of concern.
Oh.
So to a lot of people, so I think they have to break down special terms for so for me, I feel, well, scratch that. Because that's a shitty definition, but it is one that's out there. A better definition is a being that's able to think for itself and not want to die and has some level of introspection. So by that measure, there are a lot of non-human animals on Earth that fit that definition. Like chimps and dolphins, thank you, and elephants.
That's a fun semantic term.
What is?
Expanding the word people?
It's define people.
Well, I mean, so like...
God, yeah, we could be here all day.
My hypothetical. My hypothetical, is this machine creates utopia. Maybe it's just taking out the potential parts that make us unhappy, or however you want to. It puts a chip in us that just feeds us constant dopamine. Whatever your idea of utopia is.
It's a
little different, but
it sounds like a horrible place to be.
But you have to feed it everything on Earth.
Then who's the utopia for?
It's for the things that live after that.
But if you feed it everything on Earth, how are things living? I guess I don't understand that.
What if it's to force what if you have a chip? What if you have a force chip that you can put into people that will guarantee that they will no longer experience any kind of pain or suffering?
I think that would be a terrible thing. I think that some level of pain and suffering is important. That if all you were ever, I mean, are we seriously saying at the point of just being blissed out on heroin kind of happiness?
Yeah.
So
see, I think that would be like hell. I think that for there to be meaning in my life, there has to be a possibility of being disappointed.
And I'll put it this way:
because if everything you do has the exact same outcome, then there's no point in doing anything at all.
And
there's nothing to strive for.
I'll put it this way for an intuition pump. At the risk of sounding like an evil apologist, like I don't want to be as happy if my loved one lives or dies, right? So like if I'm going to be the same whether or not they continue to exist, in what sense do they even matter to me? So like the fact that I would be sad at their loss makes that's an integral part of them having meaning in my life.
Yeah, I don't think there has to necessarily be suffering, but there has to be the potential for suffering at least.
Yeah, imagine them dying or something. I guess I don't know, but like it would just be weird to think that, you know, a sibling or a spouse or something dies, and the definition of what if someone's saying I would want to feel just as happy 3 seconds later, like their death, I don't want it to impact me whatsoever. Like, what does that even mean to like say that you care about them?
Why wouldn't that be? Like, why wouldn't getting rid of grieving be awesome?
I think, I'm not saying necessarily not getting rid of grieving, but like Inyar said, having the potential, I guess it would just be weird to be completely indifferent to their life or death.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not indifferent. You greatly enjoy their existence. You love them. You care for them. But then when they die, they're gone, and you don't feel pain and suffering.
I think this was tying more into like the binary. So you used the word whacked out on heroin. I think the word that we can link to with the definition is orgasmium. And I think that's part of what you were getting at.
Yeah.
Where some people would argue that there's an ethical obligation to move humanity into an orgasmium state, which is basically just this big, I don't know if I haven't talked to a heroin user who's as stoked about heroin as you seem to think some of them are.
Well, at the point you've actually injected it.
Yeah. Well,
sure.
Isn't this the opposite of, so if we're gonna value happiness over pain and suffering, isn't this where we get? Is
that why you abandoned happiness entirely and only focused on suffering? Because of the orgasmium?
No, you
wanted to avoid that?
The orgasmium is win-win.
Okay.
There's no pain and suffering. I win in that situation too.
Oh, okay.
But I'd rather do that because remember the utils are split into two columns. It's
right.
Happiness and pain and suffering.
Yeah.
So then I've gotten rid of the suffering column, and I've boosted the happiness column to as high as I'll ever get.
So yeah, the super happy world basically.
Yeah.
Now I'm trying to decide if an orgasmium world would be better or worse than no world at all. I guess better. But it's hard. I mean, because
I think it would be indistinguishable from a world with no value at all.
So if I there's two buttons, I'm about to implant the orgasmium in everyone and everything.
I would again be ethically obligated to kill you
What if
you could push it.
What if the only option you had was to blow up everything?
At that point, I'd be neutral. The two worlds are equally awful.
Everyone experiencing constant bliss is worse than nothing at all?
It's not worse. It's equal to, because there is no growth, there is no change, there is nothing of value in a world where all you do is feel happy all the time. I don't think that the feeling of happiness is a good in its own right.
I think if I put the orgasmium into your brain, you wouldn't believe that anymore.
Okay. But I wouldn't want to self-modify into somebody who would feel that way, right?
Yeah. I don't think that pain and suffering is good. I mean, obviously it's bad, but I think that having nothing but happiness is also bad.
Or nothing but ultimate happiness all the time.
Right.
So like if everyone's scale was moved, so like, I don't know, just arbitrarily, let's say on a scale from 1 to 10, 5 and under is suffering and 6 and up is happy.
Mm-hmm.
If we could move everyone to have their base level be 6 and they can still move between 6 and 10, that sounds like there'd be some value still there, right?
6 and 10 is good, yeah.
So, but I mean, so that's what I'm saying is that they could be happy all the time, but there's at least gradations where some things make them happier than others. They're more happy doing something that they like than something that they hate. So I guess I was quibbling with saying making people happy all the time versus making everyone blissed out all the time.
So what would the if you're at a 6, what's your goal? What do you want as an individual?
You want to be made more happy.
So you want to get up to a 10.
Yeah.
And if you're at a 10, what's your goal?
Your goal is to stay at a 10.
Okay.
But then if you just put people at 10 all the time, you take away their ability to achieve any goals.
Why do you need to achieve goals? You've already achieved your goal.
I disagree. I think working towards goals and achieving goals is actually an important part of being a human. And if you were just to give someone that happiness all the time, that diminishes the meaning of what it is to do things and to matter in a universe.
Would you be less happy?
I think see, now this comes down to how we're defining happiness. If we're defining happiness as the chemicals in my brain making me feel happy feelings, then obviously no. But me right now would say yes. I would find very little value in that. I think okay. So I'm going to get briefly onto what I have heard as the definition of happiness, which I find to be the best definition, at least in my personal opinion. So basically, we are all executors of adaptions that we have evolved over time. That these adaptions help us to survive and help us have grandchildren. And what I've heard is that when you do something which in your ancestral environment consistently led to greater reproductive success in the terms of having grandchildren, those actions would bring about a feeling that nowadays we call happiness. And nowadays this doesn't necessarily map onto things that actually bring reproductive success. Like, we can be happy when we gain fame and status because that means more resources for us and our children, even though when we have sex, we're, sterilized or using birth control or something so that we don't have them. We still feel that happiness, even though it doesn't increase our reproductive success. But things that in the ancestral environment led to reproductive success are what triggers that feeling of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
Are all of those actions, or their modern day equivalent, still good or worth pursuing? Because I imagine, like, winning a war was a great rush back then.
Oh, I've heard it's still a rush nowadays, yeah.
But that's not something that necessarily is worth keeping around just for that.
No, not necessarily. I'm just saying this is the only definition of happiness I've found that actually made sense to me.
Okay.
Like, when I was trying to figure out what the hell happiness even is, things that lead to reproductive success was the best definition I could find. Or that lead to
ancestrally led reproductive success.
Yes, which you anticipate leading to reproductive success. So there comes a point where once you have accrued, this is where the treadmill comes from. Once you have accrued a certain level of status, you're not increasing your reproductive success at all because you're already at that level.
We should probably point out what the hedonic treadmill is because I mentioned it and didn't define it either.
The hedonic treadmill is the idea that when something happens to make you happy, you're happy for a set period of time, and then you revert back to the happiness level that you were at before that happened. Studies
show that people who win the lottery are happy for a few months and then revert back to their roughly base level of happiness. Mm-hmm. And the converse is true of people who are injured in debilitating accidents like quad or paraplegic.
Although there has been some interesting rebuttals to that recently.
I bet.
It also says that when you hit that when you're looking at income levels and happiness, people who are in poverty are unhappy, and then people who you hit about 70 grand and you're pretty happy, and that's about as happy as you're going to get, because after that you start to get diminishing returns. So you can make double, triple that, but you don't double or triple your happiness.
Yeah,
those are all the things that are the.
Yeah, so I mean that's the thing where if you get another girlfriend, you're like, ooh, I'm really happy for a period of time, and then it reverts back to the mean, and so then you're like, ooh, I got to go get another new girlfriend, or you publish a book or something that makes you really happy. After a year or two, you're back to where you were before, and you gotta you got to go forth and try again. You always revert back to your happiness, so you always got to strive to get up there, again and again and again.
So we've implanted you with the Orgasmatron. Is that what it's called, the Orgasmatron?
I think it was Orgasmium.
I like Orgasmatron.
I like it too.
The Orgasmatron was from Barbarella.
It sounds more like something you do to somebody rather than just like a state of being.
Barbarella. We give it to Inuyasha, who is already the happiest person in
the whole wide room
in the world. He's now happier. We turn it off for an hour for repairs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you put it back in?
I imagine I would want to at that time.
Then what's the problem? Because otherwise you're the protagonist in Brave New World.
No, I understand. The problem is that I don't consider that real happiness. I consider that the same kind of happiness that you get from taking heroin.
Couldn't you do both? Couldn't you have the Orgasmatron in there? And why is this a limiting factor? Couldn't you?
Oh, if I could just take some drugs the evening sometimes. I mean, I go out and get wasted every now and then. Yeah, I mean, if I could just occasionally plug it in, have a fun evening, then I might be willing to do that. Yeah, it would just be if someone took away my ability to not be on the Orgasmatron, then I would be upset.
But you wouldn't really be upset. Because you'd have the Orgasmatron in?
Depends on whether I have the ability to think or not while the Orgasmatron is going on.
Kind of. Yeah, you're just really happy. You're just 9 or 10 all the time. You're in that kind of state that we were talking about earlier.
Sounds too much like self-modifying to the point where I'm no longer a recognizable person.
Or at least not yourself.
Right.
Yeah. So
we're assuming that you have a self, but that's a new episode.
That is another episode, yeah.
This isn't Philosophy Bites. We can link to an episode on the self there. So it's kind of like I'll go out and voluntarily take drugs sometime, but now say I'm going to start, or rather someone's going to start giving me drugs without my informed consent beforehand, and they're just never going to stop. Like that's sort of where it's at, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, you're happier now. What's the problem? But it's like, well, I didn't ask for this, and now I feel like I'm a different person than I was. And if you'd asked me before, I would have said no.
Well, I think that's the reason heroin junkies are so sad to us. I mean, I know I keep bringing up the heroin thing, and you're like, heroin junkies aren't that happy. And no, they're not. At the time of injection, they get the bliss, which is great, but we do consider their lives sad because that's all it is. Just even if they never had any downsides. If it was just the constant bliss, that would still be really sad. There's nothing else to their life. You could replace any human with the same human, and it wouldn't really make a difference.
I'm sure that there's plenty of functional, happy people who also take heroin.
Yeah, I hear a lot of doctors.
We should make up a drug so the problem with
Soma. Can we just call them Somas?
Let's go with Soma then.
That sounds awesome.
Soma was the drug from Brave New World.
So yeah, the issue with heroin is, and really any hard drug, is that it stops becoming about, this is going to feel great, and this is going to make me stop feeling shitty.
Yeah.
So it's more like it just makes the rest of your life suck, and you're trying to get more leveled out as opposed to really enjoying it like your first couple times.
Right, but even Orgasmium or Soma or whatever we're calling it, I would consider that sad because there's just that one brain state. There's no change, there's no challenge. You could swap out any human for any other human at that point if they were all just maximally happy. It wouldn't matter if you had 6 billion people or one person.
Yeah.
Because every person is just a copy of the same happy person.
Yeah.
That's not horrifying to you? You would just keep... I mean, at that point, are you anything but a paperclip maximizer where the paperclip is a person in the maximum state of happiness? You could tile the universe with maximally happy person, and that would be okay.
I mean, it's better than pushing the button. I'd rather do that than push the button.
It's better than pushing.
I don't know that there's anything. So I think the only thing that we'd have to do at that point would be to just copy the amount of people as many times as we can, right? So then we wouldn't want to limit growth. We'd still want to maintain within resource limits. But if everyone was equally as happy, then we just want to make as many of those as possible.
I would say at that point you had wiped out the human race. And it wouldn't matter if you push the button or not, because that's not the human race anymore. So I put some value on being human and having the human race around.
The definition? You like the definition? You like having the label?
I self-identify as human.
Yeah, I don't think it's just the label. I think it is a ontologically different thing from what you are describing.
But if your goal is to achieve happiness, then this is constant happiness, even if you're not a human? What if you are just transhuman?
We should have tabooed the word happiness an hour ago.
We really should have started out with that. Yeah.
Because I feel like we're talking about...
shit, yeah. We guess you should wrap this up, actually. It's getting late.
We can cut out a little bit, too, but... Yeah. So I feel like we're equivocating a lot on what we mean by happiness. So I don't think like the happiness that humans today enjoy and that they value is the same kind of thing as orgasmion.
Right. I don't think that would be happiness anymore. That would just be a chemical state.
I take it. I take back the whole button thing. If anyone has an orgasmium, I'll take that instead.
Okay.
I would take it for a few hours, a couple times a month. You know?
Just once. Just
this once.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first one's free.
Jesus. So
what have we learned in this episode? Hypotheticals are.
When you first came in here talking about pushing the button, I didn't think you were a scary person. Like I know other people would think like someone who'd wipe out the entire race if they could is scary, but to me it wasn't scary because I could relate to that. You know. Now that you've said that you would be okay with just reproducing the one happy person throughout the universe, I find you a scary person. Which is an interesting thing. I didn't think this is where I would end the night, nor did I know that about myself until just now.
And maybe next time we'll talk more about effective altruism.
Although you're still awesome. We can have different, philosophies about the end state of humanity and still be cool with each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's the life lesson here, people.
Yes.
If you can look past your... If you can look past your extrapolated volition differences, even if you want polar opposite things, you can still be friends. Because right now you're not necessarily in charge of creating the future.
Right.
But yeah, I think next time I want to talk more about effective altruism. I think that's a fun, broad topic that is very popular in the rationalist community, but also I think very transferable to everybody else. So
maybe we can get Peter Singer into the studio here.
Shit, that'd be awesome.
We can try to get him in over Skype. I don't know if he's got time.
Yeah. Well, no, I doubt he would fly out to Denver.
We'd have to. Skype. Ooh, yeah. I bet you we could do it if we made a big enough donation.
I don't know if we have that kind of money.
Yeah.
But if we did, that would definitely be the way to do it, because then his coming here would mean a huge, decrease in pain and suffering.
What if we could just all write bad checks? Does that justify the mean? Does that justify the end?
I don't think it does. At least he certainly would not agree to that. And then we get back to the whole truth thing, which we gotta have an episode about lying at some point.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily endorse that either. I was just trying to make a joke, but yeah.
Well, you also just gave away. I hope Peter Singer isn't listening right now, because you just gave away our secret. Yeah.
Damn. They're real checks, Peter. Swearsies.
This is not that much money in the account.
No, there's times I'm super loaded. That $2 trillion check is totally gonna clear.
Just wipe out malaria if you come to the show.
Alrighty. Should we wrap it up then?
Yeah. Any last thoughts anyone want to get to really quick? Or
I really wish that before we come here, 2 years ago, I read a comment on Less Wrong called "Suffering is Valueless," which made a good argument. I thought at the time, I don't remember most of the content now, which is why I want to go back and reread it. I wish before we came here I had reread that, because it had an argument for why suffering should actually be considered valueless in ethical theories. And I will find that and send it to you and ask you what you think, and then we will not talk about it on the air, because that'll be in the future. Perfect. And right now we're in the present.
I want to see it too. That sounds interesting.
Okay.
And anything you want to plug or anything you want to pitch?
Yeah, you should. We can put 2 websites in there. We talked about what can you do, right? What can you do if you think that we should destroy all life on Earth? What can we do instead of that? We can put up GiveWell, and then there's another website, I forget the name of right now, but it goes over. It's called 8,000 hours, I believe.
80,000 hours.
80,000 hours. That's more, yeah. Unless you're working part time.
Right.
80,000 hours. You can put that in there. That's well, you only have this much time. What's going to be the most effective use of your time? So what career based on your skills and what you kind of want as a job in life. That'll kind of give you a path there.
Fantastic. We will link those.
Both good resources. Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for sticking it through if you made it this far in this episode. It was interesting, if not necessarily a happy topic.
Yeah.
So
thank you for joining us.
Yeah. We'll see you again in a couple weeks. That's it. Thanks. Go home. Bye.
Yeah.